It is my favorite show of the year. We are talking about pass rushers tonight with the Pass Rush King. Justis Mosqueda is here. See you on the other side. Yes, my favorite show of the year. Like I told you guys in the open, this is the Gold Zone presented to you by Game On Wisconsin and live in the Game On Wisconsin studios. Myself, I'm Jacob Westendorf. I'm joined as always by Jacob Morley, and I want to give you guys an opportunity right now. So look on that bottom line there and find the Green Bay draft guide for less than $10. You can get yourself 225 profiles fit right toward your Green Bay Packers. And that is up to date. So we sent it in. The Devontae Adams deal is taken care of in there. The Rasul Douglas deals, all that stuff is as up to date as humanly possible that we can add in there. So you're not going to be reading about stuff thinking that Adams is on the team when we all know that he is not. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about pass rushers as well. I'm joined by, I mentioned in the top, the Pass Rush King. I don't know your title, but I'm going to call you the head honcho of Acme Packing Company. Justis Mosqueda, an old friend of the show, a friend of the program. Justis, it has been a minute, though. How are you?
It had. I thought I scared you guys off. I don't get the invites anymore. I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
I am doing okay. It's good to have you here. So what I want to start with here is you had this thing, and that kind of became your, well, I don't know if your brand was just like memes and jokes and stuff like that, but initially when I first noticed you was your stuff on force players, and you used to do that stuff at a bunch of different places now, but that was mostly defensive linemen, pass rushers, things of that nature. So just kind of explain for people that are new here, how you kind of came up with that and what that is and how you use it in terms of, your draft analysis.
Yeah. So the numbers that come out from the combine are actually really important for line of scrimmage defenders. And I don't think it's as surprising as people would assume. I think a lot of people look at the combine and they think that's something for like wide receivers or something like that, right? Like people are going to run 40 yards downfield. Oh, I want to look at guys who are running 40 yards downfield, when that's not really the case. Wide receivers don't start in 3-point stances like defensive linemen do. They're not asked to kind of like penetrate explosively like defensive linemen do. The 3-cone and the shuttle, the agility drills are super important and honestly are pretty predictive of bending around the edge, for example. So force players was kind of a way to kind of measure that and take a historical look at the position and try to look at that moving forward. And it's something that I've really been passionate about. I mean, the pandemic changed a lot of stuff for a lot of people. I was the director of analytics for the XFL's scouting department at the time. So like I'd worked, in player personnel basically for two full years, just looking at analytics from both how should we put it, like a true production standpoint and then also the athleticism standpoint. So this is something that I was using to kind of build out for eight pro teams too. It wasn't just something that we're doing on a blog spot address anymore.
Yeah, it's been cool to watch you kind of grow up through the ranks here. And then you took over after you mentioned the stuff in the XFL, which was awesome, over at Acme Packing. So you've been there for about a year, maybe a little more than that now, right?
May, I think. So yeah.
Okay, so we're coming up on a year. And then what do you guys got going on over there? I know you have a pretty tenured crew for the most part, but you guys have got some cool new stuff going on over there as well.
Yeah, the big thing I think this past year, the content is the content. It's going to come as people get inspired for that. But the podcast network, I think we've really built it out, trying to have all these shows, in season, off season. We're coming in whenever there's breaking news for the most part. And then Tyler Brook and I, who's one of the additions that I brought on to Acme Packing Company, are breaking down position by position, like as we go through the draft. Not really talking about quarterbacks and running backs because I don't think the Packers are going to take one.
And Justis, I talk about, you're kind of growing in this space. I remember back before it was force players, the math rushers. Is that right?
Yeah.
Have you always kind of been just kind of a numbers guy? Like, was math your thing when you were coming through school, or did that kind of like get kind of like ironed out and worked out as you kind of like were able to put it with football?
So math was my topic in school because I didn't have to study, right? Like if you just learn the rules and there's always a right answer, then you could just go into the test and just like ace the test.
Okay, so you were good at math. Because everyone here that's not good at math like me is just like, dude, go after yourself, or you can't. Yeah, it's just there's rules. I still don't know those basic rules. I still struggle with math. So
yeah. here's the thing. I graduated high school with like maybe like a 2.5, right? Did not try very hard. Basically, I tore my ACL in my freshman year. It kind of like derailed my academic situation. I realized like scholarships probably isn't going to do something for me. And then was like, I'm probably going to go to community college anyway. So like, let's just let's stay eligible for sports. Let's stay eligible for school dances. We'll go to community college. I ended up improving my GPA from high school to college by a legit full point. So I was not trying hard. I think my senior year I was in like 4 AP classes. I did not take a test, including AP Spanish. I speak Spanish fluently. Bad choices in high school from my end. So yeah, I liked math because again, I just did not have to try. I did not have
You're just describing like everybody knows someone like you. And like I teach and I know kids like you too. And I'm just like, dude, why don't you try hard? Like, I don't know. I don't really need to. Let me do enough. Let me just do enough to pass.
Look, when I started paying money for the tuition, I started trying hard. And that was the promise that I made to myself. I was like, look, I'm going to give myself a little bit of time. But yeah, I mean, looking back at it, I sure would have liked those cheaper credits that I was basically taking. So
yeah, that would have been. I speak fluent Spanish. Didn't take an AP Spanish test. That kills me. But Justis, I have long had a theory that if your plan is to always go to community college, that your high school grades do not matter, and you, sir, are the living, breathing embodiment of that. So thank you. I am going to build a new education system.
That's right. Checkers, baby. Let's go.
That's right. Jake, let's jump into pass rushers. You move us on, please.
I was going to say, speaking of, improving your GPA by 1 full point. Actually, I got nothing here. Let's just talk about edge rushers. Let's talk about edge rushers.
Wow, that was terrible.
So Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, Aiden.
He's really good. Aiden. I don't know if you guys have seen that or not.
So, no, what I think is interesting to pair with this edge rushing class is when you look at this class and you look at like, not to be like that, the guy that's, hey, he's not going to be there, but there's obviously going to be some guys that just aren't going to be there. Like Aiden is probably not going to be there for the Packers. Kayvon's probably not going to be there. Trayvon Walker, probably not going to be there. But after that, it's kind of a mixed bag of guys that who is edge for you, and who do you think, is going to take a guy like that, and like where does the run on some of these edge players kind of go? Because I think with the edge position as a whole, and Justis, you could speak to this as well, if you don't get one of these guys in the top 100, top 50 even, is there a point? Is there really even a point at throwing a dart at the board and trying to take somebody that maybe doesn't meet some of these athletic thresholds, like at pick 112 or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, edge rusher is probably one of the most wasted or kind of like a black hole of a position in terms of assets after probably round 4, right? So like you're looking at 5th, 6th, 7th round edge rushers. Almost no one ever ends up making it from that group. I mean, I'm trying to think like Shaquille Barrett. I can't remember if he was a drafted free agent.
Undrafted, yeah. And then isn't Josh Sweat like a later round guy too?
But he was injured. Like he was a guy.
Yeah, so that doesn't count.
That's a whole other thing. Like the I'm trying to think of like even 4th rounders. It's like Everson Griffin and Donnell Hunter, who is kind of like super misused
You
at
get
the college
Vince
level.
Beagle was a 4th-round pick.
And he was banged up too. Yeah, he
Well, even like-
should have gone higher. Dang it!
like I'm thinking like Elvis Dumerville, like guys that are just like crazy
Super small.
outliers, like
James
like
Harrison.
Shaq is small.
That would be the one.
He's
right?
small
That would
too.
be the
Yeah,
one.
like these guys. But like that's the whole point is you're a crazy big outlier to be able to be successful outside of these top picks, and whether or not you believe the draft is even real in 5, 6, or 7, it's kind of falls in that same vein.
It's not.
I actually to your original question, you asked who's my edge 4. My edge 4 is actually Trayvon Walker. Trayvon Walker was a guy who I was kind of up until the combine where everyone wised up and was like, hey, this guy's an insane athlete. I was kind of hoping that he would make it to like 28 or something at Green Bay. My edge 3 is actually George Karlaftis from Purdue. He's really talented. I don't really understand why people don't like him as much. I mean, he was a guy that I remember when I was working the XFL stuff. We were building out all our databases, all our film glossaries, all that stuff. And he was a guy that we had kind of tabbed as like a top 10 pick coming out of his freshman season at Purdue. I understand like Karlaftis probably didn't gain a ton of steam until this past year because the COVID year was so weird for him. He was banged up and then missed games for COVID, and it's a short season. Like there's only so much hype that you can build up around that. But Karlaftis is a guy who, like, what more could you want? I mean, he's like 270. He can bend around the edge. He's an explosive player. I'd seen mocks. The big one to me was it was either McShay or Kuiper, where Karlaftis had made it all the way to Tennessee. And I was like, whoa, if he's in play for the Packers pick, like, you kind of got to turn that in. And that's almost what I worry about. Like, the nightmare scenario for Packers fans, Karlaftis is there at 22. They turn the pick at 22, and then all these teams jump up for a wide receiver before they can come back and pick at 28.
Yeah.
Like, that's the nightmare one. I almost feel like with as big of a sore thumb as the wide receiver position is for the Packers, they have to take a wide receiver with that first pick because it's just too obvious that they'd be waiting for value at 28 for the same position.
So I wouldn't be surprised. I was going to say, I wouldn't be surprised if they just moved up for a receiver either with, kind of the sins of the past of, losing out on Justin Jefferson. I mean, there was a ton of talk of them wanting Bateman so much last year and him getting hawked up right before they picked. Like, I would not be surprised at all if Goody was just like, F it. It's not happening again. We're moving up. But Karlaftis, too, is a guy that turns 20, just will hardly be 21 on the draft, too. And that's, I mean, he checks like every box that the Packers love for first-round draft picks. Premium position, young kid, freak athlete, the right size. I mean, so if he's there at 22, you're right. Like, Goody is really going to have to show us, do you really stick to your board? Are you really a Ted Thompson disciple that's going to be like, nope, this is my board, I'm sticking to it? Because there's going to be so much external pressure from everyone. Like you said, you got to take
including the quarterback.
12, yeah, 12 is the big one, right? It's like, oh man, we just got done pissing you off, and we traded away your number one wideout.
Yeah,
and supposedly, well, not supposedly, he knew too, and he didn't know that, and come back to say like, hey, I'm throwing the ball to Lazard and Cobb and some undrafted guys too. So, you mentioned, so you've got it as your top 3 guys. You mentioned Karlaftis was 3rd. 4th was Trayvon Walker. Is Jermaine Johnson and then Ojabo? Are those your last 2? Well, no. Ojabo prior to the injury. Okay, so now I'm interested.
They're not my next 2, either of them.
Okay, okay, because that's kind of the consensus. So I'm interested here.
Evaketi from Penn State. He was a guy who stood out every single time I watched film on any of these offensive linemen. So I started looking at the offensive linemen really before I started going into like the second tier of these day 2 guys. And the wide receivers, right? So I'm watching, Ohio State, Penn State for Olave and Garrett Wilson. And I'm like, dude, who the hell is this 17 coming out? Because I jumped into this draft class late, right? Last year I was doing stuff for Bleacher Report. I broke down like every single draft pick in the front 7, like probably like 2 weeks before the actual draft happened. So I had been watching film since deep since January. I'm playing catch up right now. So I didn't even know who this guy was. I'm starting to text people. I'm like, hey, 17 from Penn State, like he's a player, right? Like, is he in this draft class? And they're like, he's a second round pick in this. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that's probably my guy. He is twitched up like hell. Just a relentless guy. And he's a great pass rusher. So he's probably like a kind of like a DPR type of guy. Like, he's going to be in the Gary role that, like, you're sending him every single play. You're not going to drop him like, Preston Smith or something like that. But he's a guy that, like, you're probably not going to take it like 28, but like if you trade back from 28, right? Like, let's say you go up, you take someone like Olave 22. There's not like a huge value in taking someone at 28 just because all those guys are kind of like the same tier. You move down to the front half of the second round. That's where I could see the team taking someone like Ebiketie.
So that's interesting. Okay, because the general consensus, I guess, is what I was getting at, was those first 6 guys are the 4 you had mentioned, and then Ojabo Johnson. So where do those guys fall in after that then, if they're not 5 or 6?
I have them just right behind. I have Ojabo next.
Okay.
Ojabo, I worry a lot about him, and I don't know how much, because his fall is coming, right? And obviously because of the Achilles injury, and that's super unfortunate. I mean, that's probably based off of where he was ranked and probably where he'll go. That's probably like a $10 million injury that he had, which is just
and a full round. Yeah,
that sucks. That's terrible for him. That's terrible for the agent, the trainer, everyone around him. But I do wonder how much he was inflated by just kind of media hype of like, hey, he's the next guy, right? And like we see that a lot, this time of the year. He was a guy who I always thought was just kind of a straight line speed guy. Like, athleticism, it depends how you define athleticism, because I don't think his bend around the corner was that great for someone of his size. Like, you could see, right tackles in the Big Ten just kind of like poking and prodding at him a little bit, and he gets moved 5 yards off of his spot. And it's like, whoa, that's not a top 10 pick like you were being tabbed as, right? The other thing about the film too is like, and this is one reason why I like watching full games instead of just watching like the cut-ups on YouTube or whatever that show like just the snaps that the guy's on the field for. Like, the rotations that they're in are super important. So Michigan had a true freshman 230-pound outside linebacker that was like their starter in 3-4 base. Mm-hmm. Ojabo was only out there in nickel looks. So like he's being asked, he's being talked about as, he's a 3-4 outside linebacker in this draft class. Never even really played that position at Michigan in the 1 year that he had production there.
No, and the other thing with him that I always pointed out, and what I always was telling, I've told people who watch the show, if you have something, take the over, the under, the higher, the lower, whatever way you want to look at it. Like, if somebody's saying he's going to be drafted at 10, I bet he goes later than that.
Yes.
Because if you watch the Iowa game, for example, they're playing a team that they know wants to line up and ram it down your throat. Ojabo doesn't play on first and second down in that game at all, because they know Iowa's going to run it, and Ojabo's not a great run defender either. And that's something that, it's not an unwillingness thing. He just hasn't really done a whole heck of a lot of it. Now
and he's young into football, and that's the whole thing. It's like the whole thing is like, you're expecting him to get better than he is right now. The problem is, like, I don't know if the tools are necessarily where people assume the tools are. And the fact that, again, it's a true freshman who's, 220, 230 was coming off of the bench, taking those reps from him. It's not like it was a veteran there that had learned the system or something like that. It's like Ojabo had plenty of time to learn relative to that freshman.
Well, and for a guy like him, at what point does the juice kind of become worth the squeeze? Like, if you're sitting there, if he's still there at the back end of round 2, or I mean, some people will even say with one of those 2 first-round picks, is that too rich for a guy like him, especially coming off an injury, especially with how raw he is? Like, what would the vibes be if that was the pick at 28?
I would not like it. I wasn't a huge fan of the Gary pick, which people remind me of all the time. The big thing with the Gary pick was just they already had signed 2 free agent outside linebackers. They took Gary, like 12th overall as a developmental guy. So you're just at the end of the day, you're waiting 2 years for him to develop, which is what happened. It ended up breaking nicely for them in 2022 when, they move on from Zadarius Smith. But Ojabo is a guy who I don't even think necessarily has those type of talents. The guy I actually think has Gary type of talent in terms of as a pure pass rusher and being able to like bend the edge and stuff like that is Boye Mafe from Minnesota. The big thing with him is you're talking about Green Bay Packers traditional tendencies and stuff like that. He's older. He's on the older side. Like
23. Yeah.
He's about to turn 24
when the season starts.
He'll be a 24-year-old rookie. Yep.
Right. And he again is a guy who's a little bit of a developmental guy. He's, fairly young into his football career, but he's definitely a guy I would say that's like the last one where it's like true pass rushers. Like you're talking about Hutchinson, Thibodeau, Karlaftis, Walker, Eviketti, Mafe, and then you start getting into like, all right, are these guys run defenders or are these like total projects at that point, in my opinion?
So we've talked about those guys. We talked about Mafe. The other guy was the guy who shined at the Senior Bowl, which did you get down to Mobile this year?
No, I did not. I wasn't down in Mobile because the Packers were still involved in the playoffs, and then they had what was it? It was the Pro Bowl where they're just moving all their coaches around and stuff like that. So I didn't end up getting to make that.
That's right. Okay, so in Mobile, one of the stars down there was Jermaine Johnson, the pass rusher from Florida State. So that's the one guy towards the top-ish of this class that we haven't really talked about. So what's your take on him? I know he was a Packers Twitter favorite, especially at the beginning of this process.
I think he's a solid run defender, but he's wound up pretty tight. Like I don't see him bending around the edge against NFL guys the way he kind of did at the ACC level. So that's kind of my big hesitation there. The fact that he's being rumored as like a top 10 guy is nuts to me. It just seems like, all right, Ojabo, he's not going to go top 10. All right, we move to the next guy and we vault him up. And this is what I sit back and I'm just like, how the hell is that guy not Karlaftis? Like Karlaftis should be the guy, going that high this entire time. And it seems like we're just overthinking it.
And I'm with you. I've been on the record that, if one of Karlaftis, Walker, I've said Johnson, but one of those top 5 edges, the consensus was there that Green Bay should take that guy without any hesitation. And that even, here's the other question I have then off of that. So we didn't talk about the guys at the top because like Aiden Hutchinson's going 1 at the lowest, like 3. But Kayvon Thibodeau is somebody that they're doing the whole doesn't play hard, is the motor, does he really love football thing there. So like when we're talking about juice being worth the squeeze, where does he have to fall for you to be like, okay, just go get that guy?
Probably that Gary range, right? About like 12, somewhere around there, probably like 8 to 12. I don't think he's going to make it there though. I mean, unless we see just a crazy run on offensive tackles, which honestly very well might happen the way that tackle need is still so high even after free agency for a lot of these top teams. I could see a lot of them like packaging draft picks and just moving up to grab some of these guys. If that happens, I guess it would be interesting. But the Thibodeau stuff, you guys watch the combine, right? They're just ripping him. I mean, I know Rich Eisen's, University of Michigan alum and stuff like that, but I think it even went beyond that where it's like they could not stop talking about Hutchinson doing all the drills. And they're like, can you believe this Kayvon Thibodeau guy? He's just done. And it's like, yeah, because it's 9 p.m. local time. And there were 8 total edge defenders who ran the agility drills. 8, because they're running it so late. Like everyone knew that like the agents are done having their guys run these agility times when it's like 10 o'clock local. And it just seemed like it got taken out on Thibodeau. And, they're saying like, hey, this guy cares too much about his brand and all that stuff. Hutchinson is about to have an entire podcast on Pro Football Focus. Like, I don't understand where we draw these lines. It never makes sense. Mind you, this is the same NFL that like their intel onto the Deshaun Watson situation. If you read the
was
Brown
calling
stuff,
nobody
was like, yeah, we called their defense team and had a 5-minute conversation. It's like, what? So yeah, I mean, I don't trust these people to make decisions about character and stuff like that. It just seems like Thibodeau is a person that they don't understand, and they like things that they like easy evaluations, right?
Like Rashawn is a good example of that, even in itself, because when he came out, there was a lot of that stuff going around. Like, well, hey, he's his own agent. He represents himself. Like that. Like that's a bad thing. Like, okay, here's a young man that like went and got his degree or at least studied this and now he's going to do that. And he's more concerned about his brand and
Runs
like
his
that's
own
the stuff.
agency.
Yeah. Like that's the stuff we just
And
don't get to see.
what's the big deal about Rashawn?
Exactly.
Like he walks out of the plane with a Bane mask. He wears his merch in a press conferences in the off season. Outside of that, like he hasn't done anything wrong to anyone.
And anybody who paid any attention at all, like Rashawn Gary breathes football. Like I'm convinced like that's the only thing he actually does is just talk, think, and act about football. So that took 5 seconds for somebody to figure that out. That one never made any sense either.
Yeah. Also, Jermaine is also an old. He is going to be a 24-year-old rookie as well, which is weird. But I mean, the Packers have never taken a guy high that has not been. Eric Stokes is the oldest guy they've ever taken in the first round. He had just turned 22. So like I think there is something to that. Like I think in that first round range, like I think they would pass on him. But a guy that I'm interested in hearing your opinion on, and this is actually someone that our buddy Ross Uglum turned me on to, and it's Nick Benito from Oklahoma. A smaller type edge, but I like his tape.
So you got to tell me about him because I haven't gotten to him yet. I've seen a couple of these other guys. Like I'm a fan of John. I think you say his name, Paschal, the Kentucky pass rusher. That is my like breaking case of emergency because obviously Green Bay needs pass rush depth. Like you cannot go into a season with just two guys, and that's what honestly they have right now. Like we saw the juice that the other guys on the roster have. It's not good. If someone goes down with an injury, you cannot start them, right? So you got to find someone to be able to do that. So if it's like third round or something, the breaking case of emergency is a Kentucky kid for me. So you got to tell me about Benito a little bit. I know he's a little bit on the smaller side, but that's kind of the same situation with Myjai Sanders and Sam Williams too, right?
Myjai Sanders weighs less than I do. And I weigh
he was
223,
right?
Oh, okay.
Sick of the combine is the story. Is
how
like,
sick are you though, man? Like you're still in the 220s.
They said he couldn't hold anything down for like 3 days, and that he was adamant. He was like, "Nope, I'm running." It's like,
man, I would love to lose 20 pounds in 3 days. I tell you what, but Benito was in the 250s, but he's like a 6'3", 250 guy. But he is like your prototypical like juiced up bendy type guy that could play a little bit more in that Preston type role that like you can rush him and probably drop him as well. He's not like your typical run your face through glass type guy that they have liked, in like Z and Rashawn and Preston. But I don't know if that's going to stay the same because you look at the way like Pettin wanted his edge rushers to be, and that's what he wanted. And then they still had Mike Smith last year. And so you could kind of see like, okay, is he still advocating for that type of guy? And I'm not as familiar with Joe Barry. Maybe Joe is more willing to take a chance on someone like that isn't that 6'5", 270-pound glass eater that is a little bit more bendy on the edge. But he is a fun watch. Ross basically told me I feel he said I feel the same way about Nick Benito that I did about Harold Landry when he came out of Boston College, just in the sense of like this is just an oiled up bendy dude that people are probably going to underrate. He's going to go in the second or third round, and then we're going to look back and regret. So he'll be a fun guy for you to get to, and make sure you tweet your thoughts because I'll be interested.
I might give him a look tonight because you say Harold Landry. Harold Landry was a guy I really like. We got beer cans knocking over.
Yeah, good lord, Jake. Could you? As much work as we put into the show, don't you think we could show up to this show sober? Is that possible?
I'm drinking green tea right now, fellas.
Sure you are. Okay. Well,
I've been big on the tea recently too.
Really? Yeah, I've never been in that. But let's go to the guys on the roster that you mentioned. So they've got Gary, they've got Preston Smith, and you kind of mentioned that they need some juice on that. So you said they can't start those guys, and I've agreed with that from the jump. I know for a while you were on the Tipa train. Maybe you were the conductor of the Tipa train.
I was.
And then I watched. So I was able to, obviously, you saw more of Tipa, you saw more of Garvin, and then Ladarius Hamilton, which, I don't even think he's on the roster at this point. He might be a futures contract or something like that. But none of those guys, to me, really showed much of anything. Are any of those guys even worth, I don't want to say rostering, I guess, because they're going to keep at least one of those guys, if not two. But in a backup type of role? Can any of them be your fourth or fifth? Like in a perfect world for me, Garvin or Tipa, pick one, is your fifth edge guy because they've brought in a veteran pass rusher and drafted one as well.
Yeah, I think Garvin is probably that guy, right? He did pretty good against the run, and he's still on a cost control contract for 2 more years. So there's not really a huge reason to move on from that. Tipa is the one where he really, I promise you, he showed flashes the first preseason, and then this past preseason for 2 games, and then that last preseason game, they just went at him, and he had some of the worst film I had seen by any pass rusher in any situation at the NFL level. And I was like, oh God, he is gonna lose he's gonna lose a roster spot. Because if you remember, Tipa was on that second line of the depth chart at that point in the season. And I kind of thought going into that final weekend of the preseason, like Tipa's gonna make the roster as like the last pass rusher on the team. That obviously didn't happen. You know, after that film got out, no one picked him up off the practice squad. He finally got to move up to the active roster, and it was bad. And he played like he was a 230-pound edge rusher. So unless Tipa gets a lot bigger, I can't imagine he's going to be a high-value guy for this team, I guess is the way to put it. It's just he doesn't have enough sand in his pants. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. Like, you're going to get some of these tackles in the NFL, and if they have 100-pound difference on you, like, you're just going to get clobbered.
Yeah, and that's what it's been, and that's what I mean, he looks just so, like you said, he's 230 pounds. He weighs 5 pounds more than me, and I'm not an NFL athlete. Like, that is
some of the wide receivers too. I mean, some of the wide receivers we got are built like that. So
right, he probably weighs I tell you this, I can promise you this, having stood next to both guys, if I had to guess, if standing next to Alan Lazard or Tipa, which one weighs more, I would guess Alan Lazard. And without looking at Lazard's weight, I don't even know if that's true or not, but I would guess Lazard weighs more. Tipa's just so skinny, and it's incredible to me that good for him making the NFL. And, you know, if you're looking at that, that's somebody that you would think could be like a special teams ace or something like that. But that wasn't outside of he kind of got lucky against Detroit on that fake punt that the punter just kind of threw it in a just the wrong spot. Who knew the punter's not a quarterback? But yeah, I'm in agreement that I think that those guys, I mean, they've got to figure something out, and they can't have those guys at the starting kind of things. And there we go. We've got the center. Lazard is 227. What do we say?
I'm going to say, man, Tipa might need to play receiver next year, truthfully. And a lot of people talking about Merciless too. And I think with him, that's gotta be, I wonder if it's a wait and see type thing with the injury.
I would assume. I mean, they signed Tunyon already, but the tight end market was hot, right? So like, Whitney Merciless would be something like, we only got one in the draft. You know, we're going in with a rookie, Preston, Gary, and then the other guys that we knew weren't really kind of NFL guys. Like, it's, you know, May or June. Dang, we should give him another call. Like, I think that's kind of like the plan in that situation. If you guys want to talk about practice squad guys, I'll give you 2. Ray Wilburn, the inside linebacker, and Ennis Gaines, the safety. I really like what they put on film this past summer, and they stuck around the entire season last year. Gaines kind of surprised me, the fact that like he wasn't brought up on the roster at all when they brought in Sean Davis, when they waited so long for Vernon Scott to get healthy and stuff like that. I kind of think if Gaines gets his footing, like he's going to be a special teams guy. And I actually thought it was interesting. You know, they didn't tender Henry Black, who is their starting dime guy. Like, they used 3 safety dime up until, what was it, the Baltimore Ravens game where they had Kevin King start being like the dime guy. So what do you guys have any thoughts on those guys? Like, Ray Wilburn was a guy who obviously the numbers game was working against him at inside linebacker last year. Maybe it's a little lighter this year, depending on what they do in the draft. And then Ennis Gaines was a safety I thought like was worthy of being on the roster, but like just got lost in the shuffle apparently. And now with Black gone, I could see him being there.
I remember, Gaines was kind of turned into like the preseason darling. Everybody that was at camp, everybody that watched the games and rewatched the games really liked him, which is interesting because, and then they roll, because they roll with Henry Black for as long as they did with the draft pick in Vernon Scott on the roster as well. But I think the safety position as a whole is fascinating to look at how they're going to build moving forward with Rasul coming back and, having 3 bona fide corners on your team and 2 legitimate safeties. Like how do they get all those guys on the field? And I know this is an edge podcast, but I think it's worth talking about just with the safety position. I think it's a little bit of a sneaky need for this team too, right? They've got Savage and Amos, both their contracts coming up. Would not be shocked to see them go that route at the end of the first round. And do you have any thoughts about that as far as like, hey, let's say they take like a Lewis Scene with this secondary right now. How could a guy like that, or even Ennis Gaines, a guy like that, if he does get called up on the roster, how do they use someone like that as a third safety with the depth that they already have at the cornerback position?
The thing with Gaines is he's kind of like a box safety, almost like how Penn used to use Adrian Amos, where you're like, this guy is damn near a linebacker, right? Mm-hmm. He kind of fits that role, where the third safety that the Packers used was really that dime back, which is not kind of the role that Gaines plays. So like it would have to be, I guess, in a different role. My big question is just like, dime back, is that going to be a corner? Is that going to be Shamar Jean-Charles moving forward? Or is that going to be another safety? Because if that was going to be another, so I'm looking at Pro Football Reference right now in terms of the snap count. Henry Black played 262 defensive snaps, and that's with the safeties playing, 96% of the snaps already. So that's all basically dime look. So it's not like that's a position that isn't valued at all. And there really isn't anyone to step up in that role for the Packers, at least unless you think they're going to go 4-corner dime and it's going to be Shamar Jean-Charles and he's just going to have to kind of live with that. But that gives them no depth behind him on the roster, because I don't think Ento just can't tackle, right? Like that's his whole thing. And unless that gets fixed in this preseason, I can't imagine him being more than another practice squad guy.
Yeah, and with Vernon Scott's the one that's interesting, because it felt like
taking space, like him and Heflin every week. It was just like ruled inactive.
Yeah, and it felt like a guy that had like the inside track to be that dime safety over the Henry Blacks and the Ennis Gaineses of the world. And then I think he was active for 1 game all year. So that's where you're looking at a possibility of, is that another safety like that? Do they draft one like you guys were talking about? Or do they go the route of like re-signing Chandon Sullivan if his market dries up and he wants to come back and try? Because that's where Sullivan was. It was a little different, but he was at his best in 2019 when he was the team's dime back and the Packers had King, Alexander, and Tremont Williams playing as their primary starters. That could be where Sullivan could be somebody that's really useful. So that's another one just to throw in there on something like that. Since Jake opened up the can of worms for other positions, I want to go to the defensive line, because that's another thought that you've had on some stuff before. So the Packers signed Jaron Reed yesterday. They put him next to Kenny Clark. I think you feel good about 3 of their defensive linemen, depending on how you feel, I guess, about Dean Lowry. But with Clark, Reed, and Lowry, is that a spot where you think the Packers need to add another, with one of their first 4 picks type of things, add another young guy? Because like I've always been on the train of like the loss of Kingsley Keke didn't seem like a ton at the time, but in terms of like actual talent, pass rush talent, and just overall talent, he was probably their second most talented defensive lineman behind Kenny Clark. So it was a loss that they didn't really plan on in the future. Now they're looking at, Jack Heflin, who, like you mentioned, was just kind of taking up space last year. Tyler Lancaster, that's kind of what he does. And then TJ Slayton, who's a 5th-round rookie. Maybe he's good, maybe he's not. Is that a position where they could stand to add a couple of guys?
Yeah, I think that's one where, like, if a guy like Logan Hall from Houston is available in like a trade back or even in the 2nd round or something like that, you pull the trigger there. I think it would be for a guy like that, right? It would be like a 5-tech type of guy, because you already have Kenny Clark there. And then you have TJ Slayton, who could probably play the nose a little bit. He kind of bounces around a little. But they don't really ever like the 3-tech guys. Like, they never draft those guys pretty high. Like, I'm trying to think. The highest draft pick that's like a 3-tech type of guy was probably Mike Daniels in the 4th round. And it turned out well for him. They just don't seem to value that position as much as other teams. So I could easily, they probably, they have 12 picks or 11 picks. I can't remember which one in the draft. They should probably use at least one on a defensive lineman. I always thought they were super light on the defensive line in general in games. There were plenty of times they only had 5 guys that were active. And it's the most rotated position in the entire sport, and they just didn't have a ton of bodies, and especially with the way that they played like their penny defenses, right, where it was the nickel, but they only had one inside linebacker, and they basically have the front of the 3-4 on the field at the same time. Like, those guys are playing every snap. Like, you got to rotate those guys. There's a reason why like guys like Tyler Lancaster were getting so many reps, even though people weren't huge fans of his game. It's like he was a warm body, and they needed warm bodies. So I think the Lowry, Clark, Slayton combo is nice to start with. I don't think Slayton dissuades you from adding another guy that could kind of be like a quote unquote like base starter for you. And then Reed, I watched Reed's a couple of his games yesterday, after the signing. I watched the game against Green Bay. I feel like this is more of a like opportunity to make the roster type of signing than like he's for sure making the roster and getting a significant amount of snaps. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but like I know people quote the playoff reps where like his playoff production like went through the roof, and good for him on that. But I was watching some of the regular season games, and he's invisible for large stretches of those.
It'll depend on like kind of like you were talking about a while ago on Twitter with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Like, do they give him actual starter money, or did they give him like, here's a shot at the roster kind of money? Because there's a like if they gave him $5 million, he's gonna be on the team.
Yeah,
he probably starts.
I just like I watched this film and I'm like, they shouldn't pay him more than like $2 million, and I don't know how much of that's guaranteed. Like that's kind of where I'm at. But when your fifth guy is Jack Heflin, and Heflin basically didn't play in the games last year, like you're in kind of a tough spot. You should be able to add someone.
Heflin felt like the guy that he made the roster. It's like the old Mike McCarthy, how the hell does he not make the team thing with Joe Callahan because he played so well theoretically in the preseason. That's what it felt like with Heflin. Is like you have to have that guy make the team. Otherwise, players are going to be like, this dude worked his butt off, played well in these games. Like, what does he have to do to make
then
the
he got
team?
out-snapped by like Amir Abdullah. And then
and he shouldn't have actually made the
team. And it's like,
no,
what is going on here? Like some of the decisions were so weird where guys like that are just moving on, right? Like Henry Black played snaps for the team. Amir Abdullah out-snapped Jack Heflin, who was on the roster virtually the entire season. He's not back with the team. And it's like, so then what was the plan here all along, right? Like those are the ones that leave you scratching your head a little.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they didn't know or like what the thought on that was. But yeah, the other thing that you pointed out, all five of those guys played at least 260 snaps last year through that defensive line rotation. So I wonder if, and Kenny Clark was by far the most. He had 830, and Dean Lowry was
nuts for a guy that size. Like clap it up for Kenny, man. That's
830
insane.
snaps. That includes him missing the week 13 and week 15 game, and then easing him back in week 17 and 18 because he was coming off of COVID. So nuts. Yeah, that's
not a human. Not a human.
No, not a human. And he's incredible. What a great guy.
I think that's why you can look at the interior defensive line group and still say like, hey, that's still I know they just signed Reed, but that's still kind of a sneaky need here to try to reduce some.
I don't think it's sneaky. I don't think it's sneaky because like Justis mentioned, Reed at most is a 1-year deal. Lowry's basically on a 1-year deal. That's a guy that my thought is one of those first 4 picks. Like in general, if I were drafting for the team tomorrow, and thank whoever it is you guys pray to that I'm not, but 2 pass catchers, 2 line of scrimmage defenders. Like that's the way I think they should be approaching this draft because there's a dearth of talent at each of those spots. And that means D-line and edge, and it means receiver. And there isn't really a tight end probably worth a selection that high, but maybe there is, but probably not. So just grab a guy on day, the third round or day 3 early or something like that. But 2 pass catchers and 2 line of scrimmage defenders. I don't think that's a sneaky need at all. You could argue.
Yeah. Well, and Reed is not a guy that I think you want spelling Kenny Clark because the one thing I got from, especially from the KC guys that I write with, asking them like, hey, I thought this guy wasn't good last year. And they're like, he really wasn't. And like, he really wasn't good when they asked him to play any type of like true nose type role or try to 2-gap at all. And it's like, oh, well, that's not what you're going on doing in Green Bay then either. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that is still one of those picks. And Jacob, I know you're big on those big fellas anyways, but I could absolutely see that being one of those top 4 picks.
If they wait on it, a guy like Ellis from Idaho is an interesting guy because I think he can come in and probably do a little bit better than Lancaster already, and just kind of play that role where it's like all I'm doing is playing nose tackle, and it's like, all right, there's a role for that in Green Bay with the way that they play their fronts, right? Where they'll protect a nose tackle by playing two ends and nickel, and you're like, how does that work? Is well, Devondre Campbell is just playing sideline to sideline. There isn't a second backer out there. It's like, oh, well, that's pretty unique at the NFL level, but it works kind of to protect itself in a way.
Yeah, and I am wondering if that was what they thought might have been the plan for TJ Slayton when they drafted him, but then it looked like they didn't really use him a whole heck of a lot in that role, and it looked like they were trying to use him more as a pass rusher, which is interesting.
Honestly, I don't blame him for that, because like TJ Slayton's whole thing was like conditioning, and like if your issue, if he needs to kind of like make weight, and that's the whole point of this, like it's going to take more than a year to do that anyway. So I understand keeping the reps limited there for a rookie, but it certainly hurt when you went into a game with 5 actives and one of them's a rookie who can't really rotate into that many snaps. But I think Slayton's more of like a combo guy where he could play end, he could play tackle. He has the size for tackle, but he has the athleticism for end, so he can kind of do a little bit of both.
And Juan Mccall I was just going to bring him up, and Labo just dropped him over in the chat as well. The Kentucky kid played at like 380 at times last year at Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
He was down in like the 340s for the combine, but that's a dude too that you want him just to come in and eat blocks. Like he will do that. And if you can get that in the 5th round, like that's what I liked about the Slayton pick, because before I watched him and had realized he had a little bit more juice than I first realized, I thought that's what he was. And I kind of like that strategy of like, hey, it's the 5th round. Just give me a guy that's not going to get moved. Like I know I have one easy projection for you. I know that you can do this one thing, and give me that, because I think that could be such a super valuable thing in this defense for the Packers, even if it's just letting Kenny get off the field on 1st and 2nd downs, a little bit more this season.
Yeah, the big thing with Slayton too is like even going back to his high school days, I think he had started 1 year of defense at high school. Like he had like 5 tackles his senior year. Like he was full blown a guard tackle prospect at one of the high schools where they pump out NFL draft picks, right? So,
yeah, we got Lambo.
He's a youngin'.
Lobo's in the chat just dropping this stuff before we're even getting to it.
We don't even need a producer because I literally have this dude, so.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
There you go. Highly touted OL. Good for them. So, guys, we're running out of time here. Jake, you got anything else you want to get to our guest here before we sign out here?
Most Packers edge rusher in this year's class is who?
Paschal. I still don't know if I'm saying his name right.
Karlaftis, but okay.
Karlaftis if he's there. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And then probably Paschal. I mean, those bigger guys, great run defender, but like sneaky good pass rusher. You're like, that'd be interesting. So, maybe they're getting away from that a little bit now that Mike Smith isn't lining up a pass rusher on the center and stuff like that, which obviously helped Za'Darius' production. I'm not knocking him on 3rd downs and stuff like that, but seems like they really got away from that with Joe Barry, and they're kind of letting edge rushers just kind of play on the edge. And if that's the situation, I think those guys are going to end up probably what they want as guys who can just shut down the edge completely.
And your word of the week on Twitter has been manifesting with pictures.
Manifesting.
So if you can manifest something for this Packers draft, what are we manifesting for the 1st round?
Ooh, just Chris Olave. Just bring me Chris Olave.
Yes.
I need him. I know a lot of people like Garrett Wilson. I think Olave is the best receiver on that Ohio State team. I can't believe there's people who think he was the 3rd best wide receiver at Ohio State last year. He is pre-scandal Calvin Ridley. Like, bring him to me. I would like to see Aaron Rodgers throw him 1,500 yards.
When watch the all 22 of any of those Ohio State games. Where is the coverage rolling to?
Yep.
Number 2.
Yep.
They don't want that guy to beat us. He's good.
Yeah, so there you have it, guys. It has been manifested. He's Justis Mosqueda. You can follow him on Twitter at JUMOSQ. Find him over at Acme Packing Company. You can find me. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. You can find this Jake at Jacob Morley. And on the bottom line, grab that draft guide. You guys have got some time left. We've got some previews and stuff coming for you this week, so that'll be fun to watch. Until then, we'll see you next time. Next week on the Gold Zone, we're talking defensive line, so we'll get into a little bit more of this stuff by then. But I look forward to that. We'll see you guys then. Have a good night.